Good evening, my little creatures of the night. Mr. Wendigo back again with your late night creature feature. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from tonight? Alone in your room? Driving through empty roads? Drop a comment and let me know. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now then, let's see what tonight's tale brings us. White Wendigo. The last flight out of McMurdo left on March 15th. Clara Kincaid stood on the ice shelf and watched it go, a small gray shape shrinking against a sky that was already losing its light. By the time the engine sound faded, the horizon had swallowed it whole. That was the last time she saw an airplane for 8 months. The Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station sat on stilts driven 40 feet into the ice cap. A long rectangular box of steel and insulated panels that looked, from a distance, like a shipping container someone had dropped at the bottom of the world and forgotten about. Up close, it was bigger than it looked. 2 stories, connected modules, a greenhouse bay that grew lettuce under UV lamps, a communications array that could reach McMurdo on a good day and nothing at all on a bad one. 8 people lived there through the winter. 8 people locked inside a metal box on top of 2 miles of ice, surrounded by nothing in every direction, waiting for the sun to come back in September. Clara had volunteered. That was the part nobody understood. She'd filled out the application, passed the psych eval, packed her knives and her cast iron skillet, and flown to the coldest place on Earth because she wanted to be somewhere that didn't remind her of anything. Her ex-husband, her old restaurant, the life she'd built in Bozeman that had come apart so quietly she didn't even notice until it was already gone. Antarctica didn't remind her of anything. That was the whole point. Colt Vargo ran the station the way he'd run every operation he'd ever been part of, with checklists, routines, and a voice that made you want to do what he said before you'd finished hearing it. He was ex-Army, then private security, then a series of remote postings that got more remote each time, as if he was working his way toward the edge of the map on purpose, big man. Quiet, unless he needed not to be. The kind of leader who checked on you at 2 in the morning not because it was on his schedule but because he couldn't sleep until he knew everyone was accounted for. He found Clara in the kitchen on the 4th night of full darkness, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. "You settling in?" he asked. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." She stopped scrubbing, set the pot down, looked at him with the flat expression she used when she didn't want to have a conversation but knew she was going to have one anyway. "The dark doesn't bother me," she said. "I've worked worse places than this." "Name one." "My marriage." Colt almost smiled. "Almost. Fair enough. Just keep feeding us and we'll keep the lights on." "That's the deal." He left. Clara picked up the pot and started scrubbing again. The dark outside the kitchen window pressed against the glass like something leaning in to listen. Mark Talley was the one who kept everyone sane, or at least kept them from admitting they weren't. He ran communications, maintained the satellite uplink, and told jokes that were terrible enough to be a kind of public service. He had a voice made for radio and a face made for the kind of bar where nobody asked your name. Elliot Crane was the reason the station existed, astrophysicist, recruited specifically for the winter-over program because the South Pole's atmosphere was the clearest on Earth for deep space observation. He was brilliant in the way that made normal conversation feel like a foreign language to him. Thin, nervous, glasses that fogged every time he stepped between modules. But when he sat at his instruments and the data started coming in, something in him went still and focused, like a lens clicking into place. The 2 visiting technicians arrived in late February for a communications upgrade. Lopez was wiry and practical, the kind of man who fixed things with whatever was available and complained about it afterward. Dunham was younger, quieter, on his first polar assignment and trying not to show how much the dark unsettled him. 6 permanent crew, 2 visitors, 8 people in a metal box at the bottom of the world. The first 3 weeks of winter darkness passed the way they always did. Routine. Clara cooked breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Colt made his rounds with a clipboard, checking seals, checking heaters, checking people. Mark ran comms tests every morning and played cards with whoever would sit still long enough. Elliot disappeared into the observation module for 12-hour stretches, emerging only for food and coffee, his eyes glazed with data. Lopez and Dunham worked on the satellite array, rewiring junction boxes, swapping out circuit boards that had corroded in the cold. They kept to themselves mostly. Lopez talked about his wife in Tucson. Dunham talked about wanting to see the aurora, which he hadn't yet because he spent every night indoors convincing himself he wasn't afraid of the dark. It was routine. It was boring. It was safe. Then the snowmobile broke. Not broke. Broke was the wrong word. Clara was the one who found it on her way to the storage module, and she stood there for a full 30 seconds trying to understand what she was looking at. The engine cover had been peeled back like a tin can, the metal bent outward in long strips. Deep gouges ran across the frame, 5 parallel lines scored into the steel hard enough to curl the edges. She brought Colt out to see. He crouched next to the machine and ran his gloved hand along the gouges. His face didn't change, but his jaw worked the way it did when he was processing something he didn't like. "Ice expansion," Lopez said, leaning in from behind them. "Cold does weird things to metal out here." "Ice cracks metal," Colt said. "It doesn't carve it in straight lines." Nobody had an answer for that. They towed the snowmobile inside and didn't talk about it at dinner, but Clara noticed that Colt checked the locks twice that night instead of once. 3 days later, Mark found the wiring. He'd gone out to inspect the communications array after a routine signal test came back garbled. The junction box was open, which was wrong because he'd sealed it himself 2 days earlier. Inside, the wiring had been pulled apart and scattered across the snow in long tangled strands. Not cut, pulled, the way you'd pull taffy, stretching the metal until it separated. Mark brought a handful back to the mess hall and dropped it on the table. "Either we've got the world's strongest penguin, or something's been at our comms." "Penguins don't come this far inland," Elliot said from behind his coffee. He said it like a fact, which it was, but the timing made it land wrong. "I know that, Elliot. That's my point." Colt picked up one of the wiring strands, turned it over. The metal was stretched thin at the break points, deformed by a force that was steady and enormous. Not a snap, a pull. Something had gripped these wires and drawn them apart with patience and strength. "Can you fix it?" Colt asked. "Yeah, take me a day, maybe 2. Do it tomorrow. Nobody goes out alone after dark anymore. Buddy system, no exceptions." Mark nodded. Dunham looked at the wiring and then looked at the windows and then looked at his plate. He didn't eat much after that. That night, Colt couldn't sleep. The wind had died around 10, dropping the station into a silence that felt deliberate, not empty, held, like the whole continent was holding its breath. He lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the station creak and settle around him. Down the hall, he could hear Elliot's keyboard clicking, the astrophysicist running data analysis at an hour when normal people slept. Somewhere else, a pipe groaned as the heating system fought the cold. Then the silence changed. Colt couldn't explain it later, not in words that made sense. It wasn't that a new sound started. It was that the quality of the quiet shifted, like the difference between an empty room and a room where someone is standing very still in the corner. He turned his head toward the porthole. Something was there. A shape filled the small round window, pressed close to the glass, massive shoulders hunched forward, a head tilted down to peer inside. The porthole was 5 feet off the ground. Whatever this was had bent low to look through it, which meant it was tall, very tall. 2 points of light sat where eyes should be, not reflecting the aurora, not catching ambient light from inside the station, generating their own glow, pale and cold and steady. They were looking at him. Not near him, not past him, at him, with a focus that felt like weight pressing on his chest. Colt didn't move. He didn't breathe. Every instinct he had, every year of training and experience in places where things went wrong, told him the same thing. Don't move. Don't make noise. Whatever this is, it hasn't decided what to do with you yet. The eyes held him for 5 seconds, 10, long enough that the cold from the porthole seemed to deepen, the glass frosting from the outside in, tiny crystals spreading across the surface like fingers reaching. Then the shape was gone, not moving away, just gone. One frame it was there, the next frame the porthole showed nothing but dark sky and the faint green pulse of aurora. Colt sat up slowly. His hands were shaking. He clenched them until the shaking stopped, then got up, put on his boots, and walked to the porthole. The glass was covered in frost, a thick layer that shouldn't have been there. The heating kept the interior warm enough to prevent condensation. But the frost was on the inside, as if the cold had pushed through the glass itself. He pressed his hand against it. The cold bit through his skin. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. He needed to understand what he'd seen before he could explain it. And a part of him, the part that had kept him alive in places where admitting fear meant losing control of the people who depended on you, that part told him to hold it together, process it, file it away. Wait. The next morning at breakfast, Elliot set his coffee down with a strange look on his face. "I found something in the data last night," he said. His voice was careful, the way it got when he was working through a problem he hadn't solved yet. "The atmospheric readings from the past week, they're wrong." "Wrong how?" Colt asked. "Temperature drops that don't match any weather pattern. Barometric pressure fluctuations that look almost rhythmic. Like something is breathing, except the something is the size of a weather system." He pushed his glasses up. "And there's a signal buried in the ionospheric data. Low frequency, very regular. It's not natural, it's not man-made, and it's been getting stronger for the past 6 days." "What kind of signal?" Mark asked. "I don't know, but if I had to describe the pattern, I'd say it looks like a heartbeat." Nobody laughed. Elliot wasn't the kind of person who made jokes, and even if he was, the way he said it wouldn't have been funny. He said it the way a doctor says the word malignant. Precise, clinical, afraid. Colt looked at his plate, looked at the faces around the table, looked at the dark pressing against every window. "Fix the comms," he said to Mark. "Today. I want to talk to McMurdo by tonight." Mark nodded and left with Lopez. They suited up, grabbed tools, and headed out into the dark. They never made the call. The storm came in at 2 in the afternoon, which was indistinguishable from 2 in the morning because neither had sunlight. 1 minute the air was still and the instruments were reading normal. The next, the barometric pressure dropped so fast that Elliot's monitoring station threw an error, the software assuming the sensors had malfunctioned. They hadn't. The wind hit the station like a freight train, not building gradually the way Antarctic storms usually did, not rolling in with warning. It slammed into the western wall at 140 miles per hour, hard enough to shear bolts off the exterior panels and send the entire structure groaning on its stilts. The lights flickered, equipment slid. Clara grabbed her stock pots before they went off the counter and held on as the floor tilted beneath her. "Everyone inside," Colt's voice cut through the howl. "Seal the hatches, now!" Mark and Lopez were still outside. Colt fought his way to the main hatch, the wind screaming through the seals. He got the door open 3 inches before the pressure slammed it shut. He braced, pulled again. Through the gap he could see the yard, or what used to be the yard. It was a wall of white, visibility 0, snow moving sideways so fast it looked solid. "Mark!" he shouted into the gap. "Lopez!" The wind ate his voice. He shouted again. Nothing. Dunham appeared beside him, face white, hands shaking. "Let me help." They pulled together, got the door open a foot, and Mark came through it like a man being spat out of a wave. He collapsed on the floor, ice crusted across his face shield, gasping. "Lopez, Mark said between breaths. He was right behind me. He was right there. Colt looked out the door one more time. The white was absolute. Nothing moved in it except the wind. He sealed the hatch. The storm raged for what felt like days. The station shuddered and screamed, every bolt and panel protesting. Frost bloomed on the interior walls in patterns that Elliot stared at for too long. The heating system fought the cold and lost ground inch by inch, the temperature inside dropping from comfortable to bearable to miserable. Clara kept the stove running, hot coffee, hot soup, anything to keep warmth in their bodies. She didn't talk much. None of them did. The storm filled every silence with sound, a constant roar that made conversation feel pointless. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was the silence of a held breath, of something waiting. Colt organized the search party at what the clock said was 8 in the morning. He took Mark and Dunham. Clara stayed inside with Elliot, who had barely spoken since the storm started. The snow had reshaped everything. Drifts taller than the station's first floor buried half the modules. The communications array was a wreck. The main dish crumpled sideways. Cables snapped and trailing. The satellite uplink was gone entirely, sheared off its mounting. They found Lopez at the base of the array. He was frozen solid, his body stiff in the posture of a man who had been running. His parka was intact, his face shield was intact, but his chest had been opened. Not torn, not ripped, opened. The ribs had been spread apart from the inside, pulled wide like a cage door, and everything that should have been inside the cavity was gone. Heart, lungs, organs, all of it. Removed with a precision that didn't match any animal attack Colt had ever seen. The blood was frozen in streaks down Lopez's legs, black against the white snow. There wasn't enough of it. A body holds about 1.5 gallons of blood. Most of Lopez's seemed to be missing along with his organs. Drained. Mark stared at the body without speaking. His lips moved but nothing came out. Dunham turned away, bent over, and threw up onto the snow. The sound of his retching was the only human noise in the silence. Colt knelt next to Lopez, looked at the ribs. The edges where the bone had been separated were smooth, not snapped, bent. Whatever had done this was strong enough to bend human bone like wire, and precise enough to do it without breaking anything. "We need to get inside," Colt said. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice he used when the situation was bad enough that showing emotion would make it worse. "We need to seal up and figure out our communications." "Comms are gone," Mark said. He was looking at the ruined array, his face gray. "Satellite's gone. Main dish is wrecked. I can maybe rig a shortwave from parts, but it'll take days, and that's if I have everything I need. Then start today." They left Lopez where he was. There was nowhere else to put him, and none of them wanted to touch the body. Back inside, Colt told Clara and Elliot what they'd found. Clara's face went hard, her mouth a thin line. She gripped the edge of the counter and didn't let go for a long time. Elliot took it differently. He sat down at the mess hall table, removed his glasses, and cleaned them with a slowness that didn't match the moment. When he put them back on, his eyes were focused in a way they hadn't been since the storm. "That's not an animal," he said. "We know that," Colt said. "No, you don't. An animal kills to eat. An animal leaves a mess. Whatever did this to Lopez was systematic, surgical. It took what it wanted and left the rest as a display." He looked at Colt. "That's not hunger. That's communication." The word sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Communication," Clara repeated. "It's talking to us." "It's telling us what it can do," Elliot said, "and what it's going to do again." 3 days passed. They were the longest 3 days of Clara's life, and she'd lived through a Category 4 hurricane in the Gulf and a kitchen fire that killed 2 of her line cooks. Those had been terrifying, but they'd been fast. This was slow. This was sitting in a metal box, listening to the wind, waiting for something to happen while the dark pressed against every window like a hand testing the glass. On the first night, something tested the station. It started with the food stores. Clara had locked the freezer with a padlock and a length of chain, a precaution that felt absurd and necessary at the same time. She checked it before bed. The chain was intact, the padlock shut. In the morning, the chain was still locked, the padlock untouched. But when she opened the freezer door, half the meat was gone. Whole racks of frozen beef, vacuum-sealed pork shoulders, a case of chicken thighs. Gone. No torn packaging, no blood, no sign of entry. Just empty shelves where food had been, and on those shelves, a thin coating of frost in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like writing. Clara stared at the frost for a long time. Then she wiped it away with her sleeve and didn't tell anyone what she thought she'd seen. On the second night, the scratching started. It came from the roof first, a slow dragging sound that traveled the length of the station from one end to the other, not random, measured. Like something was walking the entire length of the building, dragging one claw along the metal, mapping the structure beneath its feet. The sound stopped at the far end, paused for 10 seconds, and then came back the other way. Colt stood in the corridor, looking up at the ceiling, tracking the sound with his eyes. His hand was on the flare gun. The flare gun was starting to feel like a toy. The scratching went on for 2 hours. Then it stopped, and something worse replaced it. A knocking. 3 beats, evenly spaced, against the exterior wall of the mess hall. The same pattern every time. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks. Silence. Like a code, or a countdown, or a greeting from something that had learned the rhythm from watching them. Dunham sat in the corner of the mess hall with a blanket over his shoulders and his hands over his ears. Mark tried to play cards with him. Dunham just shook his head. On the third night, the temperature inside the station dropped 12 degrees in an hour. The heating system was running. Colt checked it himself, confirmed the generators were operating, confirmed fuel was flowing. The heat was on, but the cold was winning. Frost spread across the interior walls in patterns that Elliot photographed and studied. The patterns weren't random. They branched and split in ways that reminded Clara of root systems, or blood vessels, or the way cracks spread through ice just before it gives way. "It's not attacking the heating system," Elliot said, studying his photographs at the mess hall table. "It's replacing it. The cold is spreading through the walls like a living thing, displacing our heat the way water displaces air in a sinking ship. It's making the station part of itself." "Can we stop it?" Colt asked. "We can slow it down. More heat, more fire. Keep the core of the station warm enough that it can't fully take hold." He looked up from his photographs. "But that burns fuel. And our fuel is finite." Colt did the math. At current consumption, with the extra heating, they had maybe 10 days of fuel left. After that, the generators died, the heat died, and the cold would pour through the station like water through a broken dam. 10 days. Less, if the thing outside decided to stop playing games. Mark worked on the shortwave. He'd pulled components from the wrecked array, salvaged circuit boards from backup systems, and spent 12 hours a day soldering connections with hands that shook only a little. He kept up the jokes. They were worse than usual, which meant he was more scared than usual, but nobody told him to stop. His voice was the only thing that sounded normal. On the second day of work, Mark got a signal, just a burst of static with something underneath it, a fragment of a voice that could have been McMurdo or could have been nothing. He worked for 4 more hours trying to clean it up, amplify it, pull a human voice out of the noise. What he got instead was something that made him set down his headphones and sit very still for a long time. "There's something else on the frequency," he told Colt that evening. "Under the static, a sound. Regular, rhythmic, like the signal Elliot found in the atmospheric data. It's on our radio frequency now. Whatever's out there is either broadcasting or it's so close to the array that its presence is bleeding into the electronics. Can you filter it out?" I can try, but Colt, here's the thing. Mark's voice dropped. The signal is strongest when I'm transmitting. When I key the mic and send out a call, the response signal jumps, like it's listening to our communications and answering. Colt processed that. Keep working, but don't transmit after dark. Dunham helped where he could, but spent most of his time staring at nothing. He'd stopped sleeping. Clara could hear him pacing his bunk room at night, boots on metal, back and forth, back and forth. She'd brought him tea on the second night and found him sitting on the edge of his bunk, fully dressed, boots laced, parka zipped, ready to run. He'd been sitting like that for hours. "You should eat something," Clara said. "I can hear it in the walls," Dunham said. His voice was conversational, which made it worse. Not all the time, just when the heating cycles off for a few seconds. In the gap between one cycle and the next, when the pipes are quiet, I can hear it breathing, right on the other side of the steel, inches away. Clara set the tea down. There was nothing to say that would help, so she didn't try. She just sat with him for a while, the two of them listening to the walls, until the heating cycled on again and the pipes filled the silence with something safe. Elliot retreated into his data. He ran the atmospheric readings over and over, refining his analysis, building models that he showed to no one. He ate when Clara put food in front of him and forgot to eat when she didn't. But his eyes had changed. The nervous energy was still there, but underneath it was something harder, purpose. He was looking for something specific in the data, and Clara wasn't sure she wanted to know what it was. Colt held it together the way he always did. Checklists, routines, morning briefings at the mess hall table, where he assigned tasks and checked on everyone's status. He made it feel normal. He made it feel manageable. And when he thought nobody was watching, he stood at the porthole in his bunk room and stared out at the dark with an expression that Clara had only seen once before, on the face of a man who'd just been told his cancer was terminal. On the third night, Mark woke up screaming. Clara was there first, because her room was closest. She found him sitting up in his bunk, drenched in sweat, his hands clamped over his ears. "I heard it," he said. His voice was raw. "Outside the wall, right next to my head, breathing, slow and wet, like something with lungs full of fluid." And then it spoke. "What did it say?" Clara asked. Mark looked at her. The humor was gone from his face, every trace of it, stripped away, leaving something underneath that was just scared. "It said my name, in my voice, like it was practicing." Clara didn't sleep after that. She sat in the kitchen with her biggest knife on the counter and her back to the wall and watched the clock count hours that all looked the same. The footprints appeared on the fourth morning. Colt found them during his rounds. They were in the snow between the main module and the storage shed, starting from nothing and ending at nothing. No approach, no departure. Just 8 prints in a line, pressed deep into the hard pack, each one longer than a man's entire leg. The shape was wrong, too narrow through the arch, too wide at the toes, which ended in curved impressions that could only be claws. The stride was enormous, maybe 5 feet between prints, and each one was pressed into the snow with a weight that had compressed the ice beneath it into a solid layer. Colt called everyone out. They stood in a semicircle, flashlight beams crossing over the prints, breath fogging in the air. "What walks 8 steps and then stops?" Mark said. He was trying for humor and landing somewhere near hysteria. "Something that doesn't need the ground to move," Elliot said. He was crouching next to one of the prints, his flashlight angled low to catch the detail. His voice was calm, too calm. "These aren't tracks in the traditional sense. They're contact points. Whatever made these was touching down briefly, like a bird that skims the water's surface. It doesn't walk on the ground. It walks on something else. The ground is just where it intersects with our world." "That's insane," Dunham said. His voice cracked on the second word. "Everything about this is insane," Elliot said. He stood up. In the flashlight glow, his face was sharp and focused, but the data supports it. The atmospheric readings, The signal pattern, the way the storm formed and moved. None of it follows natural law. It follows something else. Rules we don't have names for. So, what are we dealing with? Colt asked. His voice was steady, but Clara could hear the effort it cost him. Elliot looked at the prints, looked at the dark surrounding them, looked back at Colt. I think we're dealing with something that was here before us, before the station, before the expeditions, before anyone set foot on this continent. Something that lives in the cold, that uses the cold, that is the cold. The Algonquian people had a name for it. They called it a Wendigo. A spirit of hunger and ice that feeds on isolation and flesh and grows stronger with every person it consumes. Wendigos are a northern myth, Colt said. Canada, Minnesota, not Antarctica. Myths don't respect geography, Elliot said. The Algonquian stories describe one version, an old one. But the principle, the thing underneath the myth, that doesn't have borders. Cold is cold, hunger is hunger, and this place has more of both than anywhere on Earth. Clara looked at the prints, looked at the dark, felt the cold pressing through her parka, through her thermals, through her skin, all the way down to something inside her that had nothing to do with temperature. So how do you kill it? She asked. Elliot almost smiled. It was the worst smile Clara had ever seen. Not crazy, resigned. The stories say the heart. A Wendigo's heart is ice, frozen solid. You have to melt it, burn it, shatter it with fire, destroy the core, and the rest follows. And you believe that? I believe the atmospheric data shows a localized cold anomaly moving around this station in a pattern consistent with a predator circling prey. I believe the signal I found has a frequency that matches the rhythmic expansion and contraction of crystalline ice under pressure, which is as close to a heartbeat as frozen water can get. And I believe that something opened Lopez up with its bare hands and took everything warm out of him. He paused. So yes, I believe the folklore. Because the folklore is the only thing that matches the facts. Silence. The wind picked up, pushing snow across the prints, beginning to fill them. Colt looked at each of them. Mark, Clara, Elliot, Dunham. The people he was responsible for. The people he was going to keep alive or die trying. Then we built a fire, he said. The biggest one we can. They spent the next day preparing. Colt had them haul fuel drums from the storage module into the main bay, rolling them down corridors that seemed narrower than before, the walls pressing closer. Mark rigged flares into improvised incendiary devices, wrapping them in rags soaked with kerosene. Clara stockpiled anything that burned, breaking down wooden pallets, furniture legs, cardboard packing material. The work helped. It gave their hands something to do, their minds something to focus on besides the dark, the cold, the sound of breathing that came and went from the walls at random intervals. Clara found herself falling into the rhythm of it, the same kind of zone she used to hit in the kitchen during a dinner rush. Don't think, just move, just build. Let the body work while the brain stays out of the way. But the body noticed things the brain tried to ignore, the way the corridors felt colder than yesterday, even with the heaters running. The way frost kept appearing on the inside of windows she'd wiped clean an hour earlier. The way shadows moved in the wrong direction when flashlight beams swept the corners, as if something was standing just out of frame, stepping aside at the last second. And the smell, it was getting stronger, a sour, mineral edge underneath the recycled air, like iron and ozone and something ancient that Clara didn't have a word for, the smell of deep cold. Not winter, not a freezer, something older. The kind that existed before there were words for temperature, before there were things to feel it. Elliot sat at his instruments and tracked the signal. It was getting closer. The anomaly on his screens had been circling at a distance of 200 meters for days. Now it was at 100, then 80, then 50, tightening the circle like a noose. It's learning our routine, Elliot said during the evening briefing. It knows when we go outside. It knows when we're in groups and when we're alone. And the signal pulses faster when one of us is near a window, like it can tell when it's being observed. Or when it's observing, Clara said. Dunham cracked. It happened at dinner. Clara was serving soup, the kind of thick lentil broth she made when she wanted to put warmth in people's bones. Dunham was sitting at the end of the table, spoon in hand, staring at the bowl without eating. He'd been quiet all day, quieter than usual, which for Dunham was saying something. Then he looked up. His face was gray and slack, his eyes unfocused. "It was in my room last night," he said. Everyone stopped. I didn't hear it come in. I didn't hear the door. But I woke up and the room was cold, colder than it should have been, and there was frost on the ceiling, not the walls, the ceiling. Like something had been crouching up there, breathing down on me while I slept. Clara set down the ladle. Colt leaned forward. And when I sat up, Dunham continued, his voice flat and distant. The frost started to melt, slowly, like whatever had been there had just left. And on my blanket, right where my chest had been, there were 4 marks in the fabric, pressed in, like fingers. He held up his hand, showing 4 points, and his hand was shaking so badly it was hard to count them. Something was measuring me while I slept, deciding where to open me up. "Dunham," Colt said. His voice was calm. "We're going to get through this, but I need you to hold together." "I can't stay here," Dunham's voice broke. "I can't be in this place one more night. I'll walk to McMurdo if I have to. I'll walk until my legs stop working. I can't be inside these walls when it decides to come in." "McMurdo is 800 miles away." Mark's voice was soft, careful. "I know how far it is." Dunham was on his feet now, his chair clattering backward. "I know the distance. I know the cold. And I'd rather freeze to death in the open than sit here waiting for that thing to peel me apart like it did to Lopez." The room went silent. Dunham stood there, chest heaving, eyes wild. Then he crumpled, sat back down, put his face in his hands, and sobbed. Clara put a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then leaned into it. "Nobody's walking to McMurdo," Colt said. "We stay together. We fight this." Dunham nodded. He didn't believe it. None of them did. But the words were better than silence. The creature came for Dunham that night. Clara heard it first. A sound from the corridor outside the sleeping quarters, not the wind, not the station settling. A wet, heavy scraping, like something dragging itself along the floor. She sat up in her bunk, heart hammering, and reached for the knife she kept under her pillow. The scraping stopped outside Dunham's door. Then the door bent, not opened, bent. The metal bulged inward at the center, pushed by something on the other side that was strong enough to deform steel. The hinges screamed. Frost raced across the surface, blooming in fractal patterns that spread from the center of the bulge outward. Dunham screamed. Colt was already moving. He hit the corridor running, flare gun up. Mark was right behind him. Clara grabbed her torch, a makeshift weapon she'd built from a mop handle and kerosene-soaked rags. They reached Dunham's door in time to see it collapse inward. Cold air blasted through the opening, so intense that the moisture in Clara's breath crystallized instantly, falling as ice dust. Through the doorway she could see Dunham's bunk, the blankets torn away, and beyond it the exterior wall of the room, which now had a hole in it the size of a car. Snow blew through the gap. The wind screamed. And in the gap, silhouetted against the aurora, was the thing. Clara's brain took it in as fragments. Too tall. It had to be 8 feet, maybe 9, hunched forward to fit through the opening it had made. Pale, the kind of white that wasn't an absence of color but a presence of cold, as if the thing's skin was made of compressed frost. Thin, impossibly thin, the frame of something that was all bone and tendon with no fat, no softness, no mercy anywhere in its construction. Arms that hung past its knees, ending in hands with fingers too long and too many joints. And the face, or what served as a face, a skull-like structure with a jaw that hung open past where a jaw should stop, lined not with teeth but with ridges of ice that glinted in the aurora light. Its chest was the worst part. Through the translucent skin, Clara could see something glowing, faint blue light pulsing with a slow rhythm that matched the signal Elliot had been tracking. A frozen heart, crystalline and jagged, beating with a cold that radiated outward in waves. It had Dunham. One of those two long hands was wrapped around his torso, lifting him off the ground. Dunham was screaming, kicking, his fists beating against fingers that were thicker than his arms. The creature held him the way a child holds a doll, carelessly, like it barely noticed the weight. Colt fired the flare. Red light burst across the room, hitting the creature square in the chest. The thing recoiled, a sound coming from its open jaw that wasn't a scream, more like the noise ice makes when it cracks under pressure, deep and resonant and wrong. The flare's heat sizzled against its skin, leaving a dark mark that steamed in the cold. But it didn't let go of Dunham. It pulled him through the hole in the wall and into the storm. His screaming carried across the compound for maybe 10 seconds, getting fainter, getting higher, until it cut off in a way that Clara knew meant it was over. Then silence, the wind, the aurora pulsing green above them. Colt stood at the hole in the wall, flare guns smoking, staring into the dark. His face was blank, not calm, blank. The face of a man watching something he'd been holding together start to come apart. "We can't wait for it to come to us," he said. "We set the trap tonight." They worked fast. Mark rigged the fuel drums in the storage bay, running kerosene lines between them, packing flares into makeshift detonators. Clara sealed every entrance except the main hatch, which they left open, an invitation. Elliot helped. His hands were steady, which surprised Clara. He'd been the most fragile of them for weeks, the one she'd expected to break first. But something had shifted in him since he'd started tracking the signal. He moved with purpose now, quiet, focused, resigned. "You're not scared anymore," Clara said to him while they stacked fuel cans. Elliot looked at her. Behind his glasses, his eyes were clear, calm, sad. "I am scared," he said, "but I understand it now. The data tells a story. This thing doesn't just hunt, it exists between states, between cold and alive, between here and somewhere else. The Algonquian stories weren't myths. They were field reports from people who encountered the same phenomenon and tried to describe it with the language they had. And what language would you use?" He thought about it. "I'd call it a boundary condition, a thing that exists at the edge where our physics break down and something else begins. The cold isn't just its weapon, the cold is its body, its mind, its everything. And when you destroy one, you don't eliminate the condition, you just shift it." "What does that mean?" "It means there might be more than one." Clara stared at him. He looked back at her with that same sad calm. "I'm going to go outside," he said. "Elliot, no. I've been listening to the signal for days now. It's not just data anymore. I can feel it, in my chest, in the spaces between my heartbeats. It's been calling me since I started tracking it, and I think it knows I understand it. That's the isolation talking. That's the dark. Maybe. Or maybe understanding something this completely means you become part of it." He took off his glasses and set them on the shelf. "I'm not going to fight it, Clara. I think if I go willingly, it stops hunting for a while. It's satisfied. You use that time to set the trap, to get ready. My going out there buys you hours. You don't know that." "No, but I know the signal gets calmer when it's feeding. I've watched the data. After Lopez, the anomaly slowed down for almost 2 days. If I give it what it wants, you get a window." Clara grabbed his arm. "This is suicide." Elliot gently pulled free. "This is data-driven decision-making. First time in my life the numbers actually pointed somewhere useful." He smiled. It was small, real, and it broke Clara's heart. Tell them I wasn't crazy. Tell them I figured it out. That matters to me. He put on his parka, zipped it up, walked to the main hatch. Colt was there. He'd heard. His face was a war between command and grief. I can't let you do this, Colt said. You can't stop me, and you need the time. They looked at each other. 15 seconds, a lifetime. Then Colt stepped aside. Elliot opened the hatch. The cold hit him like a wall. He stepped through, into the dark, and the aurora turned his parka green. Clara watched from the porthole. She saw him walk 50 yards into the snow, his flashlight beam cutting a thin line through the black. He walked steadily, without hurrying, his boots crunching in a rhythm that sounded almost peaceful. Then he stopped, turned off his flashlight, stood there in the dark with the aurora above him and the ice below him and nothing else in any direction. The signal on Elliot's instrument spiked. Clara saw it come, a shape, pale and vast, rising from behind a drift like something surfacing from deep water. It moved toward Elliot slowly, not lunging, not attacking, approaching. The way one being approaches another when violence isn't the point. Elliot raised his arms, not in surrender, in greeting. The creature reached him, its long fingers wrapped around his shoulders, and Elliot's body relaxed. His head tipped back, and for one instant, in the green light of the aurora, Clara saw his face. He was smiling. Then the white closed around both of them, and he was gone. Clara pressed her forehead against the glass and cried. 2 minutes. That was all she allowed herself. Then she wiped her face, picked up her torch, and went to help Colt finish the trap. The signal calmed, just like Elliot said it would. They had maybe 6 hours. They used every one. Clara didn't talk about what she'd seen through the porthole, not the shape rising from the snow, not the way Elliot had raised his arms, not the smile. She filed it away in the place she kept the things that couldn't be processed in real time, the same place she'd kept the sound of her marriage ending, the same place she kept the look on her sous chef's face before the kitchen fire took him, the box in her chest that held everything too heavy to carry and too important to drop. Colt understood. He'd seen her face when she came back from the porthole, and he didn't ask questions. He handed her a wrench and pointed at the fuel drum ring. They worked side by side in silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full, two people who understood each other well enough to skip the words. Mark finished the detonators. Colt positioned the fuel drums in a ring around the center of the storage bay, each one rigged to blow when a flare hit it. Clara soaked everything that would burn and piled it in the center, building a pyre big enough to fill the room with fire. The plan was simple: lure it in, ignite everything, find the heart in the chaos and destroy it. It wasn't a good plan. It was the only plan. Mark handed Clara a flare. "If this doesn't work," he said, "I want you to know that my jokes were way funnier than anyone gave me credit for." "They really weren't," Clara said. He grinned. The real grin, the one that made you believe things could be okay even when they obviously couldn't. "Yeah, I know." The signal spiked at 4 in the morning. The calm was over. The temperature dropped first. Clara felt it in her bones before she saw it on the thermometer, a deep, invasive cold that pushed through the walls like something leaning its weight against the station. Frost raced across the corridor ceiling in real time, spreading in those branching patterns Elliot had photographed, the ones that looked like blood vessels. Except now they moved fast enough to watch, growing outward from the walls like living things reaching for the center of the station. The lights flickered, brown, steady, brown again. Then a sound from outside, low and resonant, not quite a voice and not quite wind, something between the two. The sound of air being pulled through a throat the size of a tunnel. "It's here," Mark said. He was standing in the corridor, flare gun loaded, his face white but his hands steady. The jokes were gone. What was left was the thing underneath the jokes, the thing the humor had been protecting, A man who was scared and had decided to be useful anyway. It came through the main hatch, not crashing through a wall this time, not tearing its way in. It walked through the open door like an invitation accepted, ducking low to clear the frame, its pale body filling the corridor with cold that made the steel walls groan. Up close, in the fluorescent light that buzzed and flickered around it, the creature was worse than Clara's memory of it. The skin wasn't just pale. It was translucent at the edges, thinnest where it stretched over joints, and underneath she could see the structure of it, not bone and muscle, something else. Something crystalline and dense, like the skeleton was made of compressed ice, the kind of ice you find at the bottom of glaciers, ice that has been under pressure for 10,000 years. Mark was in the corridor. That was the plan. He was the bait. He fired his flare gun into the thing's chest. Red light exploded against pale skin. The creature screamed, that deep ice crack resonance, and lunged. Mark fired again, backing down the corridor toward the storage bay, leading it, pulling it into the kill zone. "Come on, you frozen son of a bitch," Mark shouted. "Come get your dinner." He fired a third time. The flare punched into the thing's shoulder and it staggered, then charged. Mark turned and ran. He almost made it. 3 steps from the storage bay door, the creature's arm caught him across the back. The impact lifted him off his feet and threw him through the doorway, his body hitting the far wall with a sound that Clara felt in her stomach. Mark slid to the floor, blood on his face, one arm bent at an angle that meant it was broken in at least 2 places. But he was in the room, and so was the creature. "Now!" Colt roared. Clara hit the first detonator. A flare shot into the nearest fuel drum, and the kerosene went up with a sound like the world inhaling. Fire bloomed across the storage bay, orange and red and violent. The heat hit Clara's face like an open oven. The creature screamed. Flames licked across its body, the pale skin blackening, frost boiling off in clouds of steam. It thrashed, arms swinging, claws raking the walls. One swing caught a support beam and bent it like a straw. Another sent a stack of fuel drums rolling. Colt was already moving. He had 2 flares in his hands, one lit. He charged straight at the creature, into the fire, through the heat. "The heart!" Clara screamed. "Get to the fucking heart!" She could see it through the burning skin. The blue glow pulsing faster now, panicked. The frozen heart, the core of it, flickering behind ribs of ice that were cracking in the heat. Colt drove the flare into the creature's chest. The thing convulsed. Its arms came together around Colt, wrapping him in a grip that crushed. Clara heard his ribs break. 1, 2, 3 sharp cracks in rapid succession. Colt's face twisted, but he didn't let go of the flare. He pushed it deeper, his hand disappearing into the creature's chest cavity, into the cold, into the ice. "Colt!" Clara screamed. "Finish it," he said. His voice was tight with pain. Blood ran from his mouth. "Clara, finish it." She grabbed the second flare, lit it, and ran. She hit the creature from behind, driving the flare into its back, aiming for the glow. The fire from the fuel drums was everywhere now, the room an inferno. She couldn't breathe. Her parka was smoking. Her eyebrows were gone. She felt the flare tip hit something solid, something that vibrated under her hand, a deep resonance that traveled up her arm and into her chest, the heart. She could feel it beating through the flare, a cold pulse that fought the heat. She pushed harder. The flare sank into the ice. Steam erupted. The creature's body arched backward, its jaw stretching open wider than should be possible. The glow in its chest flickered, strobed, cracked. The heart shattered. The explosion of cold knocked Clara off her feet, sending her backwards violently into the wall, her head slamming against steel, stars bursting across her vision. The creature came apart in the center of the room, its body splitting along fracture lines that raced across its skin like cracks in a frozen lake. Shards of ice and frost blew outward, embedding in the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Then it was over. The fire burned on, fuel drums still feeding it. The heat was enormous. Clara crawled to where Colt lay on the floor, his body twisted, his face pale. His arms were still extended, still reaching for the thing that was no longer there. Colt. His eyes found her. They were clear, focused, and full of something that might have been pride. "Did it work?" he asked. "It worked. The heart's gone. It's dead, I think." He nodded, tried to smile. The blood on his lips made it look wrong. "Get Mark," he said. "Get to McMurdo. Walk if you have to." "Colt, don't." "Clara," his hand found hers, squeezed once. "You were the toughest person in this station. I knew it the first day." His hand went slack. His eyes stayed open, but the focus left them, drifting somewhere past Clara, past the ceiling, past anything she could follow. She held his hand for 10 seconds. Then she let go, stood up, and went to Mark. He was alive. Barely. His arm was shattered, 3 ribs broken, a concussion that made his pupils 2 different sizes, but he was breathing. "Hey," he said when she crouched next to him. His voice was a whisper. "Did we win?" "We won. We did it." "Good. Because I'm pretty sure I can't fight anything else tonight, not without better jokes." She leaned back, finally able to relax for a second, worn out and beat to shit. She almost laughed. It came out as something closer to a sob, but it was close enough. She helped him up, got his good arm over her shoulder. Together they staggered out of the burning storage bay into the corridor, into the main module, toward the hatch. The fire behind them was growing, fuel drums cooking off one by one, the heat chasing them through the station. Smoke filled the corridor ceiling, dropping lower with every step. Clara kicked the hatch open, like a door leading out of hell itself. The cold hit her like a wall, but it was normal cold now, Antarctic cold, the kind that killed you slowly and honestly, without malice, without hunger, just pure earthly physics. And that's when the wind started. It came from everywhere at once, a howl that built from nothing to everything in seconds. The aurora overhead, which had been its usual green, shifted, deepened, turned red. Blood red, veins of crimson pulsing across the sky like the atmosphere itself was hemorrhaging. "Clara," Mark said. His voice was very small. She looked out across the compound. The snow stretched flat and featureless to the horizon, white on black, the edge of the world dissolving into dark. And across that horizon, lights were appearing, 2 by 2. Pale, steady, paired. Eyes. 2 here, 2 there, 2 more beyond the first pair, and more beyond those, blinking open one by one across the dark like stars being born. Dozens of them, scores. Each pair identical to the ones that had stared through Colt's porthole, the ones that had watched them from the edge of the compound, the ones that belonged to the thing they had just killed. Except they hadn't killed a thing. They had killed one thing, only one fucking thing. And the horizon was full of its family. Clara stood in the doorway, Mark leaning against her, the station burning behind them, and watched the eyes open. They stretched in every direction, disappearing into the dark at distances she couldn't calculate, some close, some impossibly far, all watching, all patient. The wind rose, carrying sounds, not screams, not howls, something worse, breathing, dozens of vast, wet breaths, synchronized, rhythmic. The sound of things that had been sleeping for a very long time and were now, one by one, waking up. Elliot had been right. He'd been right about all of it. That son of a bitch. The boundary condition. The field reports dressed up as folklore. The idea that destroying one didn't end the phenomenon, just shifted it. Clara wished he were here to see his data confirmed. She also wished he were here because she missed him, and that surprised her. She hadn't thought she'd miss anyone again. The aurora pulsed red above them. The snow turned pink in its light. Clara's hand found Mark's. He squeezed back. It was all either of them had left. "How many?" Mark whispered. Clara looked at the eyes, counted the ones she could see, stopped counting when she ran out of horizon. "All of them. Too goddamn many of them," she said. "It's fucking all of them." The wind screamed. The eyes watched. The station burned. And at the bottom of the world, where no one could hear and no one would come, the dark got darker. Well, boys and ghouls, that wraps up another terrorific tale from the vault. Poor old Colt. 75,000 a year to babysit weather instruments in the dark. Should have read the fine print. Should have listened to the Inupiaq warnings. Should have asked why the last crew left early. But no. Tough guy from the lower 48 figured he could handle a little cold. Sheesh. Cry me a frozen river. Just how we fucking love it. Hit that subscribe button. New creature features drop every day at 8 p.m. Central. And trust me, tomorrow's even nastier. Leave a like if you're grateful your thermostat actually works tonight. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? What cryptid haunts your neck of the woods? You ever been somewhere so dark, so cold, that you started hearing things that shouldn't be there? I'm always hunting for the next nightmare. Remember, the Inupiaq have rules about the polar night for a reason. Don't whistle at the northern lights. Don't speak ill of the dead. And if the hunger comes knocking during those 65 days of darkness, you don't answer. You don't even breathe. Until next time, kiddies, keep your fires burning and your eyes on the trees. This has been your late night creature feature. I'm Mr. Wendigo. And hey, look on the bright side. Colt wanted to see the northern lights. Mission accomplished. He got a front row seat. Of course, by then, he didn't have eyelids to blink with. But you can't have everything. Sweet dreams, kiddies. Sweet dreams.